There's Canan Marasligil, pardon, sorry, who is of Turkish origin, living in Amsterdam and having grown up in Brussels, very, very multinational, and she's a translator, author, essay writer, activist, and a bit of everything. So she will tell a bit more about herself, and so I'll give it over to her, and I will introduce Lou after Canan's talk. Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Erika, for inviting me. This week has been incredible for me because, despite of the strike, I could give a few workshops to students, and it was really amazing to exchange with them. And yesterday, I was also very inspired by your presentations because, for a practitioner like myself, it's always wonderful to hear how you think about our practices and the things we're creating and putting out in the world. So it's really moving and interesting and also enriching for me to hear all that. So today I'm going to talk to you about a bit my work as a literary translator, as a writer. Also, well, I won't touch much on the activism part. Yesterday we heard a great presentation about how we can use online tools for activism. I'll focus more on one specific project, but before I get there, I'll tell you a bit about myself because then you will understand better why I'm doing that specific project. This picture you see that I've posted on Instagram, that's me, in case you didn't recognize me when I was a baby, and you can see there from the location tag that it was in Istanbul, so I cannot ask you try to find out where it was. I wanted to do that because on the car it's written Polizei in German, and that's the link is that my family has migrated to Europe a while before I was even born. My great-grandmother migrated to Hamburg in 1960, but she left my grandmother who just got married in Turkey. So there's one generation that gap that stayed in Turkey. But on my father's side, his grandfather and my father moved to Germany also in the 60s, to Stuttgart. So I have both sides of my family with some history in Germany. But then my father comes back to Istanbul and he meets my mom. And I'm born there, so I was born in Istanbul. But when I was 1 year old in 1980, there's been a military coup in Turkey. Of course, you heard about military coups in Turkey. This is something we did, like, just do regularly. So 60 also was a military coup. That's why my great-grandmother left as well. So in 1980, we moved to Brussels when I was a baby. And I think that's when I started translating, since I was really a baby without knowing it, because at home we were speaking in Turkish, but all the languages I was hearing outside in Brussels were mainly French, but there was also Dutch or Flemish. These are the same language, by the way, but in Belgium we call it Flemish. So this led me to do lots of different things throughout my life. So languages, I started to learn French in school at l'école maternelle, so the kindergarten. And then after that, I started learning Dutch, Flemish in primary school. And then I started learning English through popular culture, and at university Spanish. So I had all these languages in me. And as I grew up, I realized that there was one language that kept coming back, and the necessity to work with that language, and that was Turkish, the only language that I didn't officially learn. I only learned it in my family. You know, it's an oral knowledge of Turkish I had. All the other languages, I studied them, I wrote in them, and you know, I was really good, fluent in all of these languages. But Turkish, I had to work harder to really start writing and to start working in it. And this urge came from the fact that growing up as the daughter of immigrants in a Western European country, you are faced with lots of prejudice and stereotypes about your culture, about your religion. I come from a Muslim culture, and you always try to fight against those stereotypes. And one way I found that worked really well is when I was translating works and popular culture from Turkey to show to my friends, for instance, and I would translate text and poetry and songs. And it started at a very, very young age. And when I was at university, I did my thesis on literary translation from English to French. And then I thought, well, just focus on Turkish. There are enough people doing English to French. You need to do something that touches you and that you want to share with the world. And Turkish was that. So I started really being interested in literatures, contemporary literatures from Turkey. So I created an anthology with an with a publisher called Publinet. Maybe you've heard of them, and that was back in 2011, 12. I did two volumes of an anthology of contemporary Turkish writers. And I created this website here where you can discover different aspects of Turkish contemporary culture. So here there's a link to the anthology. This is the novel I translated also with Publinet, which exists in ebook and in print format. And then this is the author, someone I really want to focus on and present the work of. And so here when you click, you can just discover a bit of Turkish contemporary literature and cultures. And I use the web a lot because there's a fantastic tool called Squarespace to make websites, and all my websites are made with Squarespace. This is my personal website, and as you see here, that's first a video, but I always like to play with different types of content and put them online. This is more like a portfolio kind of thing. The project I want to talk to you about is called City in Translation. So as you understood from my childhood and how I grew up, is that languages are part of my life all the time. I mean, for me it's normal to translate. Everything I do is always through translation. Even now I'm speaking to you, I sometimes think in other languages and I translate immediately into English to try to tell you a story. So and it works pretty fast in my mind. But I would never be able to interpret, for instance, for someone else. But for myself I can do it. And City in Translation came from this urge. Walking around in the cities, I would see these different languages everywhere. And I started to make up stories like, this is Arabic, I wonder why, is it a shop? What's the story of these people in this shop? And I would try to work out what's the story behind, or sometimes it's languages I understand, sometimes it's languages I absolutely don't know. Sometimes I don't even know which language it is, but the whole idea was to try to decipher and discover what's behind, what are the stories behind. Sometimes I would invent stories, sometimes I would try to know the true story behind it. And that's how you also learn a lot about specific neighborhoods, and if you have neighborhoods with migrants history, you learn about that, etc. And this project started when I was invited at the University of Copenhagen to do a residency, and that's where I started really developing the project, and I created this online space to present it. And it's really an idea of exploring languages in urban spaces. And the idea is to explore languages that are not the dominant language of the place where I am. And that's a tricky one, because in some countries you have several languages, and in some countries you can also find interesting things in the dominant language as well. So my methodology sometimes changes from one place to the other. In Copenhagen, for instance, I looked at all the languages that are not Danish. And I found out some very interesting stuff, of course, and I'm documenting all these here on this website, where I have a fictions part. That's where I invent stories, a resources part where I talk about the making of the project, where I share some resources to do it in your classroom or with doing workshops, because this is also something I do a lot. I do workshops around this. I take a group of people to any city and ask them, look around you, document some languages. Let's come back in the room, do a workshop and be creative about it. Just be creative about what you've seen. And some amazing things happen. It's really magic, and people say, oh, I had never looked at my city in this way before. And so for me, it's very important to be online with this, because I've created this Instagram account, City in Translation, and as you can see, for instance, I was in Lancaster. Here I already have several photos from Lancaster, and it's really like certain things are like, this one is in English, for instance. See, it's English, but I still put it there because I wanted to document it. And I do say, I know it's but it's important. It was important for me to document this specific project that's happening here about. It's a feminist, and I'm a feminist, so for me it was important to document this. And I was just walking by today, and one of the posters was already gone. So one of the magic of this is that you really archive things that that disappear. Sometimes I have graffitis, I go back to a street and the graffiti is gone, but then the graffiti is on the City in Translation page, and that I really like. That it's one way also to keep it alive. Sometimes on the Instagram account, what I do is only document, so I don't do much because there's not like I just want to put, if I see a different language, sometimes it's not always very interesting, but I don't care, I just put it there. And sometimes there are like very interesting things that can happen. Like for instance, this is a funny one, it's lies, but in Dutch it's a name, it's like wie is Lies? Who's Lies? It's a woman's name, but then I see it as lies, and then you can interpret things the way you want. And this takes me to a very specific project I did around Turkish, also in City in Translation. You remember, so Turkish always comes back, huh? It's like, I can't stop it. And then what happened is that I started seeing the Turkish language even where it wasn't. And I decided to play with that. And I have created an exhibition called Yearning for Turkish. And this exhibition was presented in print as well. And now it's an online project. And so this is the language, my language. So I started, the exhibition starts with the word political, because everything I do is political, because as I said, I'm also an activist, feminist. I fight a lot for social justice, women's rights. Coming from a country like Turkey, I think you don't have a choice, really. So freedom of expression is one of the very important things I work on. So this is also like a statement starting the exhibition. So you see here, Politik Pols, huh? It's in Danish, and Pols, it's like sausage, but it's an insult also. So I imagine it's like a bad insult. But so it does say something about a politik is something negative, or and what I see, politik in Turkish, politik, is an adjective, it's not a noun. So for me that was important to start like this, to show that this is something I'm active in. But then I divided the exhibition into different themes, so immigration, and here you see, for instance, examples from different cities of Turkish. The word Turkish appears. For instance, this one is in Brussels. Özgürlük means freedom. And every time I try to create a text, and this yearning for Turkish tells the story of myself and my family, as I just told you earlier, migration family. So I link it to the things I see. Here, for instance, cumin and spaghetti. It's because when I had a conversation once with my father about why didn't he take us to Germany, why did he choose to come to Belgium and not Germany, a country already knew. And then he said, I didn't want you to be in a country where you can understand that language. I was like, what language? Yeah, the language where they treat you as a Kümmeltürk, and where they use the word spaghetti presser. So these were insults for Italians and Turks. So Kümmeltürk is, you smell like a cumin. It was an insult. They would and that's where I felt the pain of my father of these years in Germany, but I never knew it. I just learned about it like 3-4 years ago. So when I saw this özgürlük, freedom, on a window in Brussels, I wrote next to it the text of my father about cumin and spaghetti. And then this one, for instance, Peaceful Heim. This is in Amsterdam. This is the city where I moved to a decade ago. And this is a memorial for the gastarbeiter who came to work to Amsterdam on the docks, the ship, I forgot how you call it. And this is a memorial for them. And there's a quote from Yurtta Sul, Cihanda Sul, from Atatürk. So it's peace at home, peace abroad. It's a very famous quote from Atatürk. So here again, here I talk about migration in the Netherlands, and I link it to the migration story of my family. And this one, for instance, was in Copenhagen, homesick. It's very weird because I was walking in this gentrified neighborhood of Copenhagen in Vesterbro, and I saw this florist, and on top of it, Pınar, video is written, and I immediately knew what it was. It used to be an old video, like blockbusters and stuff, but the Turkish one I know, because in Brussels when I was a kid we would go to the Turkish neighborhood to rent VHS or Betamax of Turkish movies, because we didn't have Turkish TV yet at the time. And then I thought of this neighborhood, like it used to be, then I learned that a neighborhood with lots of migrants, now highly gentrified. And I would imagine like, a little girl, Danish one this time, going there, renting a movie with her parents. And then, so I tried to write something around that. So this is really the documenting, the idea of documenting what's in the city, and writing down and try to be creative with it. This one, for instance, Mod and Meh, I copied a text from Reddit about Turkish barbers in Ireland and in Scotland, because when I visited Ireland, I realized, this is in Cork, I realized there were so many barbers, Turkish barbers, and I was like, is this something we're good at? I didn't know. And then I checked on Reddit, and this whole dialogue, and I was like, why is there suddenly so many Turkish barbers? I live in rural Scotland and every village has a Turkish barber. Exactly, right? There's been a sudden explosion of them, like the way they talk about it on Reddit. They're usually excellent, if a little expensive, but they have no idea what a mod is. Unfortunately for me, so a mod. It's the first time I heard what I still don't know. It's a type of hairstyle, I guess. But anyway, so I found this on Reddit, so I decided to copy it and put it next to this picture. I took charisma, that means charisma in Turkish. And this one, for instance, Fatih Cami, Amsterdam. It's a mosque, Fatih Cami. So it's an experience I had in Amsterdam during museum night. It's a yearly event where museums open their doors late at night, and lots of places also participate, like this mosque in the center of Amsterdam, really not far from the Anne Frank house, like 2 blocks away from the Anne Frank house. And they had at 8 p.m. a call for prayer. So imagine you're in Amsterdam, the canals, touristic, and Anne Frank house is just over there. You have the church and the call for prayers. I have goosebumps telling you this now. And hearing that, sitting with standing in the street, and it was raining with all these people. So I tried to tell about those feelings, photographing this, which is not a very interesting photograph. As you can see, not all photographs are interesting. It's really about documenting. It's not about the photographic work. But I loved also the color, because the color is from museum night, so it's not always lit like this. So it was purple because of museum night, etc. And then I put the text, and I told about this amazing experience, like all people, Dutch, non-Dutch, tourists, locals, everyone stand there and just stood there and listened to the call for prayer in the middle of Amsterdam, near the Anne Frank house. So that was amazingly moving, I thought. Then a part of documenting these, for instance, empire. I like to touch also on the idea of Turkey's current wish to go back to those Ottoman times, and they have a very imperialist approach to certain countries, like Bosnia, for instance. My best friend is from Bosnia. I know Bosnia well, and it's a country I really love. And this was in Sarajevo, and I see this, so Museum of Crimes Against Humanity and Genocide, İnsanlığa karşı işlenen suçlar ve soykırım müzesi. So, and I was like, how dare you? You don't even talk about your own massacres and genocide, and you come here, you open a museum, because these are all funded by Turkey. So I was really mad, like, first do the work in your country, but then of course, so I put there a poem I have translated from Karin Karakaşlı, who is an Armenian poet from Istanbul, and this is about the denial of Turkey denying their history. And I'm almost done here. So these, you see a few other examples. You can find all these online. And this, for instance, this was in Germany, joined a coup. And I was in Berlin right after you know, it was September, 6 weeks after the coup attempt, and I was walking in Berlin and I saw this, and immediately, of course, I thought of that. But you may not see, it's a silly advertising for a Vespa or something, you know. But I see join the coup, I immediately think of the attempt, and so I write about that. So you see how my mind works, and I link it with Turkish, where it is not Turkish, it's English, but so I make these weird links. And I want to end, so this was in Brussels, that's also beautiful, it's for refugees, a message for refugees that was on a window in Brussels. And I would like to show you this one, Araf, slow. Anyone here knows Welsh? This is in Wales. Araf means slow, obviously, but in Turkish it means something else. So imagine I'm on a bus from London to Wales, to Aberystwyth, and we're in the forest, it's late at night, really like I'm super tired, 11 at night, and then the bus goes on this road, like not lit at all, we only see the road through the lights of the bus, and I see these words appearing, Araf, Araf, Araf. I'm like, oh my God. And I started thinking, where am I? Because Araf in Turkish means purgatory. So imagine everything that was going on in my mind. So I thought, okay, next, I couldn't take the picture on the bus, but then the next day I said, I have to take a picture of this and write about this. And the last photo of the exhibition is this one. It's in English again. Not all who wander are lost, but what matters here is also the story, because I took this in Athens, Greece, the first time I've been to Athens, and I had a wonderful conversation there with a local who told me about his family coming from Turkey, from Kayseri. And so his family was in Turkey, and there has been exchange of population in the beginning of the century, and that's how his family then came back to Athens. And he told me that he went back to see his home there, the home of his grandparents in Kayseri, etc. So it was a beautiful conversation, and it's very important for me to have these encounters, because politically we always think, politically there are lots of issues between Turkey and lots of countries, and you know about Greece and Turkey, I imagine, but the people is always different on the people level. And there we found a common language through this story. And that's how I wanted to end this exhibition, on this note that, for me, translation and languages, especially when it's in public spaces, it's a way to connect. It's a way also to empower people, because if you see your languages visible in the streets, you feel empowered. If you are a Turkish kid who sees Turkish around and everywhere in Western Europe, you feel empowered. Or an Arabic kid, or any kid who's from any migrant families or with a migrant past, if you see your language visible, it empowers you, because these languages are still not visible enough in the mainstream. And that's what I'm trying also to do with this project. Thank you.
Thank you.